Rubs. We've kind of been talking about tactics coming up to deer season here, and we haven't really touched on rubs really much at all. Uh, and there is some like tactical information out about rubs, like hunting rub lines and that kind of thing. Like I guess Dan, just to start off, like what how do you feel about the intel rubs give you? Like what do you use them for?
So, um, it's an interesting question because there's a lot of different ways you can look at rubs. So, one thing, you know, I did some studies years ago because I saw something that really clicked with me. I started noticing that mature bucks rub trees up higher. So I started watching for that. I started doing trail camera studies. I started measuring rubs, and I found that rubs were in series of heights, and it kind of seemed like once they were over 4, the rubs were like waist high or higher on me, and I noticed this to be true. So I ran cameras and stuff, and I kind of documented and proved it to myself. So now, when I go into a property, what I want to make sure is there are rubs that are waist high or higher, or there isn't really a target there for me. That's not to say I wouldn't shoot a real nice 2 or 3 year old, but I want to target mature bucks. If you're not hunting mature bucks, you won't kill mature bucks. So there has to be some of them big rubs. Now, with that said, I just have to find a rub on the property. Now, most people, the way they think, their focus is on sign, a scrape, a rub, a track, a sighting, right? So to most people, when they see a big rub, they think they're going to kill a big buck. There's something that clicks in their head. So everybody in the general public, except for a small percentage of guys like me and you, focus on that wherever they find these rubs. But what you got to remember is that now think back to a couple of recent episodes we did when we broke down how close I'm hunting to bedding when I kill mature bucks, the stats.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when I kill or see a mature buck, I'm within 200 yards of bedding. And when I shoot a mature buck, it's usually on the edge of darkness, and I'm hunting right next to his bedding area, and he's gone 50, 60 yards. So if that deer is up for a half an hour, before dark, and he's in bed right about daylight, how many of those thousands of rubs you see in the woods do you think are made in daylight? They're night animals. Not to mention that first half an hour of daylight, I think they'd be a little more hesitant about rubbing because they're still a little spooky, right? They're night animals. The nighttime is when they do things. So the overall majority of rubs that you find are made at night. So these guys that put stands over these giant rubs they find and think they're going to kill a buck, well, people have been doing that for decades, and I don't see them having walls full of bucks doing it. I really don't know too many people that's their tactic, is to hunt over the biggest rub they find who have anything on their walls.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm looking for is with rubs is that they're in a place where I can kill the deer. But the main thing about the rub is kind of what you're alluding to, is it tells me there's a buck on the property to hunt. And then my scouting and my knowledge of bedding will kill it.
Yeah. Is there ever a scenario whenever you would set up over a rub?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When it's a daylight rub. And what I mean by that is it's in the position where I think a deer is moving in daylight. So I need to see those rubs or that rub line or those giant rubs coming out of a bedding area, a buck bedding area, right? Or they're rut time frame bed rubs and they're in a doe bedding area or on the edge of a doe bedding area. That's when I would probably set up where there's rubs. And then they have to be the high rubs. Now, with that said, there's a thing about rubs. If you're in a high deer density and there's a lot of big bucks, say there's 5 or 6 target animals in the same area. When you get into one of the big buck bedding areas, you'll find it tore up with rubs. big rubs, right? You'll find rub lines going into those bedding areas. But as is the case in a lot of public land, if there's one mature buck, you'll find rubs on that land, but you don't necessarily find rubs in the bedding area. And the reason for that is there's different reasons for rubs. So you have rubs that are made because they're marking where does are. They mark when they cross a doe trail. They might mark the downwind side of a doe bedding area. They might mark the upwind side where the trails go in and out to feeding areas. They might mark food areas. They might claim food, right? So you see rubs around oak flats. You'll find rubs around fields because they're marking that food. They might be marking those food because of does. They might be marking it because they're claiming that food. And when they mark bedding, it's to claim the bedding. And what I've found is in the lower densities of bucks, if he's got no competition of bucks his age class or size, and there's no up and comers going to take over and push him out, that buck has no reason to rub the bedding area. All the little bucks will leave him alone. They'll satellite bed around him, and you won't find the rubbing in there. I can remember years back when there was a lot more big bucks by Dave's. That bedding area, the bedding areas in there, like the classic bedding areas that were the best bedding areas in the area, would have those classic rub lines going in there to be torn up. And then they had that CWD hunt, and they started killing all the bucks. Now, still, when we'd hunt there, the big bucks, whenever we'd see them, would come out of that bedding area. But with a lot less bucks and only being one or two in the area, you wouldn't find the rubs in there. The whole bedding area went void of rubs, but that was still where the buck I was targeting was living.
Yeah.
So there's not always going to be rubs in bedding areas, but they're going to be on the property somewhere. They're going to be somewhere out there to tell you that that buck lives there, because all bucks rub their antlers, but they have reasons for rubbing and reasons where they rub. One thing, for instance, is like they will parallel fields. They'll have a parallel trail. Sometimes you can't even see the trail because these bucks only use it around rut time, and it's only to check on does. And it's just a faint little trail. And every time they cross a doe trail, they'll rub. And maybe they're 20, 30 yards in from the field in the heavier brush. And guys will see these rubs on these heavy trails going in, and they'll sit on those trails thinking that that's where the deer is coming into the field. But really, that deer's parallel in that field, just smelling to see if any of those does going in and out of that food source are in heat.
Yep. I was going to bring up a couple other things. How much stock do you put into like travel direction with rubs?
I don't put a lot of it into it. I know a lot of guys say that the side of the rub that's you're facing is the way the deer was coming at it. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I've watched a lot of deer make rubs, and I've watched them kind of come around a tree to the side and work it from the side. And I've seen them walk by and come back and rub it. I would say generally, if there's a ton of rubs and they're all on one side, yeah, there's probably a movement going one way.
Yeah.
But really, I would focus more on the bedding, the travel in and out of bedding, where those deer are moving in daylight. And really, the rub directions don't matter at that point. It starts to get to be a mute thing. Now, I take that back if you're hunting funnels or leeward sides of hills. But I'm really, when I start getting on public land and pressured land, you don't see as many mature bucks on those leeward hills and stuff. You see some, and some places are better for that than others. But generally, if I do see that, it's in a real little tight area where there's two thick spots in a little open area where they're on that ridge, not these long ridges, where you see the 2-year-olds and occasional 3-year-old running up and down the ridges looking for does. If 5 or 6 year old bucks did that, they wouldn't live to be 5 or 6 years old.
Right. What about you find like the species of trees, like if an area has more of name the tree buck likes to rub, and do you think that has anything to do with it? Like, you think there's some trees that deer just like to rub their antlers on?
Oh, absolutely. So like in the swamps, poplar trees are real common. And poplar trees are trees that a lot of people who aren't very versed on trees will call them birch trees or you know, they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they got a white bark, but they don't have that flaking like paper, you know.
Yeah.
But the bark is like a white, and then they have a small round green leaf that turns bright yellow in the fall, and it makes a rattling noise in the wind. Those poplar trees, deer love to rub them. I don't think they can walk by without rubbing them.
Mm-hmm.
But it misleads people because in a lot of cases there ain't any more deer there than there is anywhere else in the woods. It's just every time they go by there, they rub some of them trees because they like that odor on their antlers, and they like the way that they rub. There's something about it they like. I think a lot of times the picking of rubbing trees, a lot of it has to do with the odor of the tree. They're big into scents, you know, and they get that scent on their forehead, and their, you know, and they mix their orbital scent onto there too. So they like a certain odors, you know. But they really like those poplar trees. And you'll find islands of those poplar trees. They don't grow all over the place. They'll grow like in a patch. You'll have 100 of those trees like in a small area, and like say 50 of them are rubbed, and there'll be rubs from every height. And people will see that and they'll go nuts. Oh my gosh, you know, 100 rubs in one spot just got to be where the bucks are. And it could be.
Yeah.
But it really has to be about, you know, is this a spot where they'd move in daylight? You know, otherwise you can walk right past that. And there's so many of those islands of poplar trees around here that are rubbed up like that, that if you sat on those hoping to see a buck, hey, good luck. You have odds like everybody else, because everybody that sees all those rubs is sitting there too. You can't find one of those patches here in the marsh without looking around close and seeing a couple of trees that were set up in. You just can't. And if you were killing bucks doing that, I mean, you'd have walls full of them, right? And you don't.
Yeah. Right.